Hey everyone, this is Elijah Johnson with FinanceAndLiberty.com, and back with us today is David Quintieri, the author of The Money GPS. David, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me on. It's a pleasure.
All right, well, I first wanted to discuss about Switzerland became the first country to issue 10-year bonds with negative yields. Did you want to discuss a little bit about this, and what is the significance of this?
This is huge news, but of course it was expected. Now, we have seen this type of talk coming recently where actually Janet Yellen, for example, prior to becoming the chairman, said that if they could push interest rates into the negative territory, then they would. And here we are experiencing this today. So Switzerland, just won, but this is definitely not the last. We have seen other instances of this before where individuals will have to essentially pay a tax to keep their money in the bank. And this is the kind of thing that will spread because the value of money is declining rapidly. They have used inflation to take our money for, generations and beyond. And now they're going ahead with this type of scheme with a negative yield, and all of the assets will eventually be in this category. And if you think about it, well, Switzerland is obviously not the best example, but most countries around the world aren't very secure at all. They're not safe. For example, with the Eurozone, there are many dangers there. And should you not get a high yield from your investment, the risk is definitely not worth it. So this is becoming more of an issue that we look at with these investment companies that need to search out for more risky assets. They call them assets. And essentially, this is going to be a problem for the future because they need to consistently generate more and more profit. But in doing so, they need to go find riskier things. So this is just going to be another financial crisis. I'm calling it the financial crisis part 2, and it's already going on today. And, I hope we can get into those details. But essentially, we're going to have the same problems that we did before.
Right, and you've said recently that the economy right now is in worse shape than it was in the crisis of 2008.
That is absolutely correct. Because if you just subtract two simple factors from the equation, out of the thousands and thousands of different indicators that there are, you just subtract the US dollar and you subtract the US stock markets, and you have a very different picture that is painted. Now, when you see the news and you look at, all of these different money websites and different things like this in the financial industry, they continuously point to the US stock market or the US dollar. Every single time it looks negative, they will always say, well, the stock market has been rising recently, so we're not too worried. It doesn't matter that the corporations are more in debt now than ever. The individuals are more in debt now than ever. You look at the nations themselves, by far more in debt more now than ever. So we have a problem that they cannot possibly dig themselves out of at this point. It was bad back in 2008, 2009. Right now, today, it is much worse. You can see historically with stock markets around the world during different crises that have occurred, their stock markets have exploded in price. Does that mean that they were great investments? Absolutely not. It was their currencies that were being devalued over that period of time. We're seeing this with our own eyes. And unfortunately, the majority of people, 99.9% of people, will not know what happened until it's written in the history books and their children are reading about the failures.
You mentioned that right now people are looking at the stock market or the apparent strength in the US dollar to show that the economy is doing well. To start with the stock market, did you want to discuss about that you believe the stock market is actually overvalued 5 times?
That's absolutely correct, because when you look at it based on these different indicators that I've talked about on my channel before, whether it's PE ratios or any other type of ratio, this is just one example, but it looks to me that it is incredibly overvalued. Just take into account the amount of debt that has been added to the country, while at the same time, the jobs have been shipped overseas in many cases. When you look at the unemployment number, which is completely fraudulent, you have to compare the unemployment number to the actual amount of people employed. This is another statistic that continues to get worse. And if my memory serves me correctly, it's the civilian participation rate, something along these lines. And this shows you the amount of people that are employed. And actually, I believe it's now decades backwards. We actually approached a level that we haven't seen in literally decades. If I'm not mistaken, it was 37 years back. So we're going back in time way further than the financial crisis. There are not enough jobs, but if they keep showing the unemployment number, that unemployment number could be at 0%. As long as the people are, willing to believe it, it doesn't really matter. It's all a show. This is all a movie that's being played for us, essentially. So what we do is we look at the indicators, the real indicators, not just the dollar values of anything, but you need to look at the actual strength of any particular economy, look at how the imports, the exports are doing, look at how many people are employed, look at the savings rate for different people. This is huge. When you look at how much people are willing to save, and then you see how much is actually being bought, then you have to realize who are buying the big ticket items. Is it really only the richest of the rich able to buy it, or is it for investment that's buying it? You need to realize all of these different factors and how they are very important to the future of the economy.
Definitely, and getting into the rise in the US dollar recently, we've seen, the apparent strength of the US dollar, but you've recently stated that this is kind of an illusion because this is just a rise of the US dollar against other currencies, and this is happening because the other currencies are actually falling. Did you want to discuss a little bit about this?
This is very evident and it's taking place right before our very eyes. We can see the US dollar is consistently being preached as a safe haven. Now, to me, it looks like the US dollar at this time, let's say within the past year, has been doing well. It's definitely been one of these currencies that are once again considered as a safe haven. But you're comparing it to the euro, for example. The euro is doing terrible, only compared though to that US dollar. If you see what's going on with the Venezuela, for example, they are also doing terrible. But the US themselves are considered the lender of last resort. The Federal Reserve will be there to backstop any problem. The people know this, the investors know this, and therefore money will continue to pour in. But we see this changing now. We see how, for example, China setting up the AIIB, the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. We see the money really changing hands now. It's a very slow process that's taking place, but look at the currency swaps that have been set up, where we see dozens of countries actually now setting up currency swaps. And what this means, for those who don't know, is that these countries do not do trade using the US dollar, which is the reserve currency. They have to go and instead of converting their own currency, which essentially, there's transaction costs involved with that, they don't have to do this anymore. So it's a small portion of the total amount of trade that is going on, but the contracts and the agreements continue to be re-signed and expanded. So it looks like they're going in that direction and ultimately weakening the dollar in the long term.
Right, and you've stated another thing that might threaten the US dollar is that the yuan might become included in the IMF's STR basket of currencies. Did you want to talk a little bit about this?
They've been talking about this for quite some time, and I do see it as something that will happen. Full convertibility is ultimately the goal for China. However, it's not going to happen overnight. Anybody who thinks that it's just going to happen overnight and all of a sudden the reserve currency, the US dollar, is going to be pushed off its throne, I don't see it occurring like that. Of course, it could, but generally, like just going by, in a historical sense, it doesn't happen like that. It slowly fades away and decays. So we can expect the same thing to occur with the US dollar as these new organizations are formed and expanded. The US dollar begins to weaken, lose its strength, and this will just continue on. That's where I see it heading.
Now, I briefly wanted to move our focus to Greece. You've said that if Greece defaults, this could cause a domino effect. Did you want to discuss a little bit about this?
This is what worries me, and I talked about it in my book with the euro viral contagion. You have one interest rate, you have one currency for an extremely diverse set of nations. This is setting up for failure because when you think about it, you cannot simply use an individual interest rate when you have different sets of risk involved. But this is what they did, and it set up a terrible moral hazard. This has been going on with the ups and downs here since the introduction of the euro. Of course, it was never going to be a smooth ride, but now we've seen, particularly since 2011, where it's getting extremely chaotic. They have not been able to do a single thing in order to fix these problems. They set up these different funds and institutions to sort of mitigate the issue, but it hasn't done anything beneficial whatsoever. They talk about the ESM, and it gets spit out there every so often, and this is a complete failure right from day one, and it's not going to do anything for the time being. If Greece were to actually fail, if it were to leave the Eurozone, I believe personally that this would be a strengthening for both the euro and both Greece. But of course, that's not how the markets will react. At least initially, we're going to have mass chaos because they're going to start looking at Spain and Portugal and Italy, and they're going to say, look, they're running into the same issues, and in certain categories, even worse. And you look at the GDP statistics, when you actually calculate that Europe is able to use things like prostitution and illicit drug activity as part of their GDP, you know this is way gone. It's a fraud. It's a lie. And this all has to come down. So I call it the dominoes falling because one by one, they all will. Now, this is going to perhaps, for the time being, actually increase the US dollar. But ultimately, the US dollar is dead. The euro will be able to survive because of the stronger nations if they do a few things that are smart. They have to basically, if they want to survive, they have to push out some of the weaker nations and consider it to be a loss for the time being, take a little weakness for now, and then begin to rebuild. However, I don't see it going that way because they knew Greece would be one of the weaker nations from day one, yet they brought them in. And this is all about control. They want an unelected set of technocrats sitting above all these nations making the decisions. For those who aren't aware, these nations have laws created for them, not by their own governments, not by the politicians that have been put into place, into power like a bunch of kings. I'm talking about the EU who are creating the laws above these governments. And this is actually in front of us. This is something that they've been waiting for a long time. They finally got it. It was swept underneath them, and now here we are. This is going to be a big problem for the future. Very much so. We need to pay attention to Europe and everything that is happening there. I don't think this new government is going to be able to really do what they've intended on doing, simply because you have the Troika in place. You have the strength. A stronghold by the IMF, the ECB, the EU. They have so much control over all of these nations, and particularly when a country gets in debt and a person gets in debt, they will always owe those creditors and they will control every aspect of their lives.
All right, and to wrap up for our viewers, did you want to remind our viewers, maybe give them a outlook for where you see the U.S. economy heading and maybe some steps that they can take to prepare?
Well, I believe that individuals, first and foremost, need to get prepared. That is very, very important. Not tomorrow, but today. I believe in the most diversified portfolio, if you want to use that word, than anybody else I've seen. In fact, I believe when you own precious metals, for example, you shouldn't own just gold and silver. And I'm not talking about platinum and palladium either. What I'm trying to suggest to you is that the more denominations of those gold and silver, bullion, bars, coins, junk silver, common silver, you need to own all of the different aspects, different denominations. Every single possible different thing you can get means more diversity, means more security, because wherever there's risk, there is fragility and there will be failure. So obviously, this is one category, gold and silver. I'm sure all of your viewers know about this. That's for sure. So you need that. I'm not one of these individuals that says put 100% of your money in there. I don't agree with that. We need diversification, but we do need some precious metals. Storable food is obviously very essential. Many people think that, they don't want freeze-dried food. They don't want something that the astronauts use and all of these silly things. But if they're not willing to do that, why not buy a bunch of bags of rice, things that you will eat anyway, get large bags, put them in your storage, and these are things that will last a very long time. You can have cans of different things that you will eat regardless. Just keep a much larger storage than you normally would. And these are simple methods that you can use. You can obviously, I should have gotten to this as my first point. Number one, you need to get out of debt. All debt will crush us. As I just mentioned a few minutes back, not only will the nations be crushed by debt, but you as an individual will be in that same situation. So I believe, number one, get out of debt. That is the best way to prepare because we're unsure of the future. You might think a hyperinflation will wipe out all your debt. I'm not willing to take that risk. We don't know what's going to happen. So definitely get out of debt. And then you want to begin slowly making the preparations. If you have your money in the banking system, you are in fact pumping up their system. You're fueling it. So if you don't like JP Morgan, you don't like Goldman Sachs and all of these individuals and institutions, why do you have your money with them? They're all interconnected. So you take your money out of the banking system and you put it into something real. Look, we need our money in the banks perhaps to pay our bills and other things for our daily expenses, but there's no need to have your money, your savings in the bank. So that's where I'll leave it for that. And, I don't know if there's anything else you wanted me to cover.
No, that's fine. Thank you so much for the update today. And I guess, would you like to share with the viewers where they can find you and any last thoughts you might have?
I just wanted to say that we need to make the preparations for ourselves. We need to gain the knowledge for ourselves. Nobody else is going to do this for us. We weren't taught this in the education system, and we need to essentially do this for our own friends and families. Do what we can. That's where I'll leave it for today. If anyone wants to find me, I'm at The Money GPS on YouTube or themoneygps.com. My book is available at Amazon as well. You can flip through it there and see if you like it. It's really a basic book that gets into the historical sense and of course then prepares people for what's coming in this financial crisis.
Well, once again, David Quintieri, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me on.
This video was brought to you by ReluctantPreppers.com. Click here to watch Reluctant Prepper's latest interview with Jerry Robinson. Jerry Robinson talks about economic lies and the petrodollar demise. Now for a clip from the interview.
We are really just one cyber attack away from absolute chaos in the streets. Just imagine, we saw Washington go dark just a few days ago whenever they said that a transformer had blown. There was some concern that it might have been a hack attack. We already know that Russia hacked the White House and was able to pull down data